The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more.
When I would think about the authority of the commission in Illinois, I talked a lot about the distribution grid. We have to build the grid correctly. If we build it right, I believe and hope that it can absolutely increase clean energy, but also increase reliability, also have downward pressure on costs.
Are you speeding the energy transition? Here at the Clean Power Hour, our hosts Tim Montague and John Weaver bring you the best in solar, batteries, and clean technologies every week. Want to go deeper into decarbonization? We do too. We're here to help you understand and command the commercial, residential, and utility solar, wind, and storage industries. So let's get to it. Together we can speed the energy transition.
Today on the Clean Power Hour, why you should care about your PUC. Welcome to the Clean Power Hour. I'm Tim Montague, your host. Check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Please give us a rating and a review on Apple or Spotify, and check out our YouTube channel and give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel and tell your friends. Like I said, today on the Clean Power Hour, why you should care about your PUC, your Public Utilities Commission. My guest today is Carrie Zalewski. She is the chairman of the Illinois Commerce Commission. The Illinois Commerce Commission is our PUC here in Illinois. It oversees the utilities. Welcome to the show, Carrie. I look forward to this conversation.
Hi, Tim. Really, really grateful to be here, and I'm excited about the conversation too.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by DinoWatts. If you're a solar PV asset manager or performance engineer, you need better data and better business intelligence. With DinoWatts digital twin benchmarking technology, you get more accurate, efficient, and faster performance measurement results. The 4th generation Dino recently completed a technical review by DNV. You can download the report at dinowatts.com. That's DENOWATTS.com. Now back to the show. We met at the Solar Expo in the Midwest Solar Expo a few months ago, and you were on stage explaining to our audience there what's going on with the PUC in Illinois. But give our listeners a little background on yourself. How did you come to the PUC? It's easier to say PUC than ICC, so we'll just call it the PUC. How did you come to the PUC? You've been there for 4 years, and this is your swan song, but give us a little background on yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. I went to school for engineering. I really like learning about technology, and went straight into law school. And I found myself in roles working in environmental compliance. I served as the chief environmental compliance attorney for our state's DOT, Department of Transportation. And then I got tapped to serve on something called the Pollution Control Board in Illinois. So another acronym, PCB. And the PCB is like the environmental court of the state. So if there's a violation of the Illinois Environmental Protection Act, or there's a change to the regulations, it comes before the PUC, or excuse me, the PCB. See how hard it's getting. And we did I did a lot of great things there that I'm proud of. We changed the water quality standards in the Chicago River to make it more accessible for recreational use. You see, the water is just getting better and better. But the last case I want to point your attention to, we worked on something called the multi-pollutant standard. It was the ability for fossil fuel generators to come together and determine how they wanted to emit their SOx and NOx. So if they had scrubbers on one unit and they could control it really well, they might be able to ramp it up in another unit, as long as overall they were under these certain marks. Well, during that proceeding, there was this conversation about must run and MISO and reliability. And that's kind of where I really cut my teeth on the energy markets. It was also there that I realized to make some of the biggest impacts and to help out and make change in environmental issues is to shift over into energy issues. There's certainly a Venn diagram overlap, but the energy space is really exciting and interesting and looked very challenging. So Governor Pritzker runs on a clean energy platform. He says, I hope in my first term to put forward this clean energy legislation. And so knowing that was his plan, I put my hat in the ring. There's an online process to apply for these sorts of positions. The governor picks, in the Senate, you go through a Senate hearing and they have to confirm. And this is kind of a typical path for a PUC commissioner. I think it's something like 41 of the states have this path. It's either legislative or gubernatorial appointee, where the other ones you actually run. It's an office you run for. So Governor Pritzker appointed me, and it's been a real roller coaster, but truly the challenge and the honor of a lifetime.
Very cool. And I love it that you were involved with the Pollution Control Board. Because, in the Midwest, we have a lot of coal and natural gas fired power plants. Illinois is a mix, an unusual mix. Okay, 40% of our grid power is nuclear. And so that's a carbon neutral. Once those plants are up and running, it's carbon neutral. But and they have their unique set of challenges. But then the rest of our grid power is a lot of coal, natural gas, and then starting about 15 years ago, wind, and now solar. Thanks to FEJA and CEJA, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which is what Pritzker was so excited about. So, the energy transition is about reducing the load of CO2 pollution. There's other kinds of pollution that come out of these power plants, right? There's particulates, there's mercury, which is a heavy metal, which is toxic to living things. I just love it that you're connected to that, cleaning up the environment, and now really leaning into other ways of regulating the grid and encouraging the transition to the extent that the PUC or the ICC, as you call it, can do that. I guess that would be very helpful, though, if you would explain for our listeners, what does the ICC do day in and day out, and what level of control do you have over these things like the energy transition?
Yeah, thanks for that question too. It's so just to level set, every state has a PUC, like you mentioned, and the ICC, so it's called the Illinois Commerce Commission, but the ICC has been around for 100 years. In fact, even older, because we had our roots in some regulation over the railway. So rails was the first legal monopoly in Illinois, but now these PUCs have been created because another legal monopoly in the United States are utilities. So utilities are allowed to be legal monopolies for a variety of reasons. Economies of scale is one. We don't want 500 entities building wires and everyone competing to use their wires. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So utilities have agreed to be monopolies, or get to be monopolies rather, but in exchange, they agreed to be regulated. And so we are the regulators of the utilities. So, there's different sorts of authorities in different states. Illinois, we have authority actually in some towing trucks and intrastate movers. I obviously won't spend much time talking about that today, but we, on the utility side, we balance the interests of the utility. We do not want to push them into bankruptcy. So we make sure that their books are solid. We balance the interests of the utility and the consumer to ensure reliable, least cost services in gas and water and electric. Now, what does it have to do with clean energy? Well, a lot. So there's a really great article that Julian Spector wrote about in Canary Media, talking about what is a public utility commission and why should you care? It's funny, I send it to my parents because I just still don't think they understand what I do. But the reality is these conversations about things like net metering and how renewables are interconnected to the grid are being determined at PUCs every day. Certain PUCs are vertically integrated, meaning that the regulators regulate the generation. And they make decisions and they approve the ability to close coal plants, when and how that should be done, whether there's what type of resources should be coming online and when and how much all of us are paying in a socialized way. So these are big decisions that are truly happening, not just in Illinois, across the entire country. Because the reality is that the transition is happening. I know you, Tim, and your listeners know this. The transition is happening for a variety of reasons. It could be state policies like Illinois. It also could be because of costs are coming down and it's now competitive with these traditional resources like coal and gas. Or consumer preference. There are now companies, as you know, that have a preference outside of state policy. They've indicated that they're moving to net zero and they will only buy clean energy. And so this transition is happening, and it's the regulators that are approving all the spending by these utilities and also making changes of rules and regulation of how DERs, distributed energy resources, solar, wind, storage, interconnect to the grid. Because the reality is it's the utility that has complete control of the grid. And there's a reason for that. They're trying to protect their grid. So when anything tries to come to interconnect, they're protective and they want to make sure that it's done in the proper way.
So we have 3 IOUs in Illinois: ComEd, Ameren, and Mid-American. And they cover 70% of the population of the state, a big percentage of the population. That's the big urban areas, Chicago, and the St. Louis area, and then various metros in central Illinois like Peoria and Champaign and Bloomington Normal. And then the rest is Swiss cheese with public utilities. These are municipal utilities and rural co-ops, which are in a different bucket, right? The ICC is not regulating the public utilities, is that right?
We do not regulate municipal and co-ops, that's correct.
Yeah, but in Illinois is a deregulated state. So there's the grid operator, let's just say ComEd in northern Illinois. And then there's power suppliers or energy suppliers. These are 70 different companies that can sell kWh to consumers and business owners, and are you regulating that part of the industry as well then?
So we regulate the wires that ComEd, Ameren, Mid-American are building so that the electrons can move through it. Mm-hmm. And obviously, I think you're touching a bit on the alternative retail electric suppliers. So another piece of this is that in being a retail access state, you as a customer can choose if you want your default utility to be the server of the electrons, or if you want an alternative provider, the ARES, alternative retail electric supplier.
Right.
And they go out and procure the energy on your behalf and then provide it to you. We have regulation over the ARES. We don't have regulation on the price that they can impose on customers, but their business practices, how they get customers, how they make sure that their registration is up to snuff, things like that. We have regulation, and we have actually a newer enforcement team that we started since I became chair to make sure that we're really going after the bad actors in the ARES space. So it's a different type of authority than the utility, the investor-owned utility, because they ask us for things like, how do we figure out what class the customer is? Like, are they commercial or industrial? Is it low income? And they come to us and they file a proposal in an open forum where anybody can, that different parties can intervene. And it's decided in an open case. It's it's a robust process that doesn't happen on the ARES side. The ARES is determined what the contract says, how much they charge the customer, for example.
And now we're in the process of fulfilling CEJA, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which is incentivizing community solar, large DG, large commercial industrial, and then small commercial industrial and residential solar. And these projects all have to connect to the grid, whether it's a residential solar project or a large C&I or small utility, a community solar project. They have to get permission to connect their project to the grid operator, whether that's Ameren, ComEd, or Mid-American. And one of the challenges that developers and installers face is that the utility is kind of like God in that relationship. You have to fill out an application to interconnect your DER, your distributed energy resource, to the grid. And then they will make some judgment. They'll do an analysis. Let's just say it's a 2 megawatt behind the meter large industrial solar facility. And the utilities say, well, you know what? We're going to bump this to a level 3 interconnection study, and then they take a little more time and of your money. You have to pay more money for the interconnection study, and then they'll come back and they'll say, oh, you know what, this is going to be a level 4, so we need 3 more months and we need $1,500 more dollars. And then at the end of that, they'll say, oh, guess what? We're happy to give you an interconnection agreement, but you have to make an upgrade to the grid in the form of a transformer upgrade, because the transformer can't handle all the stress that you're going to put on it with this DER. And sometimes that's fine. It's no big deal. It's some tens of thousands of dollars, but it's not a deal killer. Sometimes it's too much money and the project falls apart. And this happens, I think, more often with community solar than with behind the meter projects. But where in this world, so to speak, that we solar professionals work and live and breathe actually day in and day out, where does the ICC come in that world?
Yeah, no, it's a problem. We have these goals, and we have a commitment on behalf of the state, and we cannot have the utility being the barrier. And the story that you're telling me is something, I've heard both in Illinois and nationally, and it's something that CEJA tries to address in a couple of different ways. And, let me give you a couple of examples. So first of all, we under CEJA, we're first of all we did a grid audit. And so we took stock of how many interconnection agreements are or how many interconnection applications are filed with Ameren and ComEd, and how long it's taking. So we have some metrics of like what's happening. We can hear something from the utility, but it helps to have information. So there was an outside consultant that took this information down. It's in a publicly available report. The grid audit does a lot of things. It talks about where has money been spent in the last 10 years on these grids, and for the ability to move at the end of the first round of CEJA to the multi-year grid plan, which is open before the commission now, which I should mention, I'm not able to talk about open cases, but the language of the legislation says that it's required that the commission look out 4 years and make sure that the policies and goals we have in the state match where the utility is spending money. So the utility is building a grid that matches our goals, and our goals are stated in legislation to increase DERs for the purpose of meeting our goals. So interconnection, one really good tool we now have is a performance metric. So we talked a little bit about my time at the PCB and my time at the ICC. So being an energy regulator versus an environmental regulator at the PCB, and being an energy regulator at the ICC. At the PCB, we were, kind of chasing these entities with a stick, the threat of a penalty, right, that we could enforce. At the ICC, we do have some ability on complaint cases to assess penalties, but more than that, we hold the purse strings. Like the utility asks permission, and that's a lot of authority. And one way that we can incentivize a utility to get behavior that we want is through a performance metric. And this idea of a performance metric is that we say, okay, utility, right now, this is what you're producing for whatever metric we want. You can have a metric on how long it takes for the utility to answer the phone when someone calls. This is how long it takes now. If you shorten the time, you can earn more money. This is how much you can earn if you shorten it by this much. If you shorten it for even more, you can earn more. That's an example of a metric. And in Illinois, we have a metric on interconnection times. So how long it takes for an interconnection to happen. So removing that barrier. If the utility using the grid audit, they come back to us and they show that there are better results, the time is quicker, for a variety of reasons, then they can earn more. So they are now incentivized through something through money. I want to give you another tool. So we changed some of the language in interconnection. Your whole point about the different levels of reviews, we were noticing that certain utilities, like it was default, that were falling into these more complex reviews. And so we changed language, like the default is actually a lower level, an easier, I'm sorry if I'm getting the numbers transposed, but a easier review unless they prove that the more rigorous review is needed. So there's changes in the language. There's also an interconnection working group. And this is an example where developers can be involved and should be involved in the process. I know that there are trade groups, like I know CCSA is very much involved in this interconnection working group. And let me explain how a working group works. So the idea is that all entities are invited. You have the utility there. You have ICC staff there, not commissioners, but staff. And then you kind of have people in the industry. And they set an agenda, and it's an ongoing working group. So there's an agenda for this month, next month, and keeps going. So you decide what topics you're talking about, and you just start kind of opening up the conversation, and you look for consensus. There may be times where you see actually quite a bit of consensus with a group, and that's good. It kind of quickens the process. You use that consensus to move that idea forward. Then, of course, you're going to have major contention, like they're on opposite ends. So in a situation like that, they can agree to send it up to the commissioners to decide their dispute. How should this be resolved? Because the reality is, Tim, this example of a developer having major issue with the utility is one I've heard. And the only way that I can actually do something about it, besides some of these processes I just explained, is if they file a complaint with the commission. I can resolve it if someone files this information in a docket, and then all parties can see, and then I can rule at the end what should be done. I do know developers worry about it. That takes time and lawyers, and oftentimes they have to continue to work with the utility, and so they don't want to burn a bridge in one place. So I appreciate what you're saying, but we're hoping some of these new tools will help remove the barriers for interconnection.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more. I love that example. I guess I would, love to see somebody do a before and after, from when these incentives came into force, so to speak. Because that's what really matters, right? Is that we shorten the period of interconnection. And we are going to talk about electrification of transportation, because you do oversee transportation to some extent, and that's a very important transition that we're also going through while we're making the transition to wind, solar, and battery storage. But what else do energy professionals need to know about the ICC? You mentioned filing a complaint, and I myself did that one time. Because my customer was getting the runaround from their Aries about net metering. And so I was just like, this is not cool. And I filed a complaint. And lo and behold, we got an immediate response. They claimed that they were doing nothing wrong, but they were responsive at least, and got things moving forward in a timely manner. So I know that this works and that the utilities will pay attention to the ICC. You have real authority, which is a wonderful thing. But if you're an energy professional or a consumer, integrating clean energy into your world, into your residence or your business, or you're participating in community solar, what else should we know about the ICC and clean energy?
Yeah. So I think, when I would think about the authority of the commission in Illinois, I talked a lot about the distribution grid. We have to build the grid correctly. If we build it right, I believe and hope that it can absolutely increase clean energy, but also increase reliability, also have downward pressure on costs. And let me explain why. So it's kind of like grid 1.0 and grid 2.0. If you picture, I like this graphic when I speak about this. I often refer to the idea is that your grandfather's grid, you had the centrally located generation source, transmission, steps down, distribution, feeds into a house. And it's a one-way flow, just goes into the house. People turn their lights on, and that's the end of the story. Now we know it looks very, very different. And it brings a lot of complexities. It has, so you go to that house, the image of the house, you now have a house that's feeding two ways. You have, first of all, increased load. You have your EV plugged in, and you're taking more energy from the grid, but also you can feed it back into the grid with a two-way flow. You also have things like microgrids that can add reliability. I'm really excited about this concept of virtual power plants. So we want all the solar online, we want the wind, we want the storage, and it's great for reducing carbon, but wouldn't it be great and wouldn't it be really interesting if when the grid goes down in another place, you almost have like a little microgrid in an area that's feeding and like healing the grid in another place. So these entities are already online. We just need to send the right price signal, the right market, to make sure that they're participating in the market. And so our main job is to build that grid, to make sure there's enough wires, but not too many wires where needed, because we're all paying for wires. Every time we add wires or substations or smart inverters, it shows up on all our bills. So we have to make sure we're not spending too much, but we're building enough to support these renewables and then use it in this really smart way. We talked a bit about generation and how we don't regulate generation. So we spend a lot of time at the ICC advocating on behalf of consumers in Illinois at our two regional transmission organization or RTO markets. We're in two. So ComEd, we're in PJM, in MISO, in Ameren, we're in MISO. And these are large markets. MISO has 15 states. That's kind of the swath of the Midwest. And PJM shoots out east, northeast, and has about 13 states. And these are good. It's good that these markets are large. What that means is diversity brings the ability to access cheaper and have more of the ability to purchase on behalf of customers. So we spend a lot of time in Illinois advocating at these two RTOs to make sure the markets are working as they should, that they're properly valuing clean energy. For example, in MISO, there's something called a seasonal construct, meaning that acknowledging that capacity, that solar is worth more in the summer and should be paid more in the summer than in the winter, because the sun's out more. And so getting these pieces right and making sure that the grid is working as it should as the renewables come online. And that ensuring that clean energy is getting its fair share in the market, it's getting what it deserves, is another really important thing that we're doing at the ICC.
Well, since you mentioned MISO and PJM, this brings up the project, I think, called Grain Belt Express, which is a project to build out large-scale transmission lines from, I think, Nebraska all the way across Illinois, mostly impacting MISO, but also interconnecting to PJM. Do you have any purview into what's going on with projects like that?
Yes, because it's a siting review. So another really important thing that states do is they approve siting, to make sure that, when you put down a transmission line, we know that there's a social good. We know that it's important for reliability, bringing on renewables, but it also impacts landowners, not just the landowner that the line is running through, who are compensated. So they do get that benefit, but it's the landowners adjacent. And so it's on the commission to determine that it's done correctly, that everything's been considered, and that everyone in that picture has been considered. So Grainbelt was a case before us that we had to do a final review. Just generally, I can speak about transmission. I think most of the nation agrees that we need more transmission to make sure we can move like wind from the Dakotas when it's very windy into the population centers in Chicago and out to New York and out to these other places. And transmission is the key. It brings reliability, it decreases costs, but it also allows for renewable entities to move electrons quickly. And so we advocate for more transmission, but making sure that we don't build too much because we all pay for it, and that the cost allocation is done properly. So how much we pay for it is fair. So it's kind of two ways. So we advocate for these transmission stances at PJM and MISO. And then also when the transmission line, it comes time to build it, we review to make sure the footprint is properly considered with all the different actors.
And what is the status of that project in particular? Because it is a very important project carrying huge amounts of wind energy primarily, but now increasingly solar energy too, long distances from where the resources are to the population centers. There's 1,900 plus gigawatts of clean energy in interconnection queues around the U.S. That's a huge amount of clean energy projects. The total grid is around 1,200 gigawatts of power plant capacity. And so as we green the grid, we are having to make modifications, right? Because we're going to a decentralized model, right? Where the power plants are many more numerous and disparate than before, where we had big central gigawatt scale power plants. So I don't know, do you have any more comments about this project in particular, or projects or similar, upgrades that are being made?
Yeah, I can tell you that we did approve the review of Grainbelt. Obviously the status is something I just don't know. You'd have to check in with Invenergy and see what the status of that is. And then I don't know if there's additional filings in different courts about it. But I can just speak to the fact that, we did ultimately approve it this last spring.
Very good. Very good. Are there other aspects of this energy transition before we talk about transportation, electrification of transportation, which is a big deal because that's 40% of our carbon footprint in the U.S. anyway. But anything else related to your work at the ICC that you want to highlight for our listeners around clean energy? I
think I'll add that, we're trying to figure out storage. We know that we need it. We know that there's we're getting signals from the operator, the MISO grid operator, that there's a resource adequacy issue. And that's a technical term, meaning that it's the generation. And the signal and the understanding that we're getting is that fossil fuel entities are retiring, which is expected and sometimes prompted by some of these policies, but they're not being replaced quick enough. And this goes to your point, Tim, about interconnection queues and transmission issues, and supply chain, as you know, is wreaking havoc on this process. So there's this shortage. In MISO, they call it mind the gap. It's off the London tube. So the idea that we have renewables that are trying to get on and trying to work their way through the queue, and we have fossil fuel generation that's retiring, but there's a gap of 5 years. And so what do we do? And so there's a lot of conversation. It can be done through price signals. We have to make sure that we're getting storage on, and maybe even if it's some of these socialized costs. Under CEJA, there is a bit of ability to build out some storage on retiring fossil fuel plants because the infrastructure is already there. That's one good example. There's a lot of look on demand response. So just bringing it back to that conversation on performance metrics. Another performance metric is peak demand. So decreasing the peak demand, because we know that prices are set and the worst things happen on the hottest of days or the coldest of days. And so making sure that we have all the things that can avoid, first and foremost, major outages and deaths. We saw that in Winter Storm Uri. We saw that in Elliott. Things like demand response are the things that can come in and save the day. So making sure that we are valuing them in the market so they can be there when needed. We know storage is a really important part. We actually did a storage study where we looked at, cost benefit analysis, different types of storage, how much storage we might need. There's a conversation in the General Assembly this last spring about setting like an RPS for storage that has to go through legislation. I think that's another important piece, finding a revenue stream for resources that we want to see come on quickly.
I mean, you're an engineer by training. When you think about storage, doesn't it just kind of make sense, right? That storage is really good for the grid, right? Because it's like a sponge, right? It can absorb instantaneously extra power, and it can discharge instantaneously or virtually instantaneously extra power. So it's like a power plant, but it's bidirectional. It's way more valuable than solar or wind, or coal or gas for that matter. Now, is it cost effective? That's another matter, right? And that calculus is being done, and society is now incentivizing the adoption of batteries. An example of this is the coal to solar legislation in CEJA, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, includes a whole section called coal to solar, which was a standalone bill previously. Vistra, the utility from Texas, owns a fleet of coal plants that it is going to sunset. Some of them are already sunset, and replace those coal plants with batteries and solar plants. This is about 300 megawatts, so it's not a huge amount of power, but it's non-trivial. And Vistra, for anyone who doesn't know this, is one of the largest, if not the largest owner of storage assets in the country. They own the Moss Landing project in California, so they're no noobs to grid storage. But doesn't it just make sense? Like, this is going to be really good for the grid to install a lot of storage.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think we all agree that storage is needed, and it's needed in a big way. You're absolutely right, Tim. I think it's costs. I'm really excited, and I love learning about the different types of storage, the 4-hour long duration. We know that Form Energy just opened up its manufacturing plant, which is exciting news. We know the multi-day is really interesting and will certainly, I think, be used on the grid for different purposes. There's a lot of look at these RTO markets of how, so solar only gets you so far, but every time you connect solar with storage, if you pair it, it's going to get a whole different value for obvious reasons. And they're creating the market for that so that we make sure that we incentivize. So yes, it's obvious, it's needed. It's needed quickly, and it's needed tomorrow. We need the diversity of the types of storage. The answer is unequivocally yes.
And just for our listeners who don't know, included in CEJA are incentives for distributed storage, $250 per kWh. So storage is cash positive in less than 2 years for commercial industrial scale or small utility scale storage. So storage is coming. Let's talk about transportation in our last few minutes together, Carrie. I really appreciate your time here. We are, slowly but surely electrifying the transportation networks and infrastructure in the United States. What is your purview, and what is your perspectives on what's going on with electrification of transportation?
Yes, the goal in Illinois is 1 million EVs by 2030. We have a long way to go, admittedly. I thought I checked, and we're at like 60,000 registered EVs, where on one hand, just a couple years ago, we were at 20. So it's moving in a nice, nice curve, but so far to go. And so CEJA speaks to this in a variety of ways. And I should mention that CEJA gives authority to, different agencies. So for example, EPA runs the rebate program. So under CEJA, if you qualify and you purchase an EV, you get a rebate. It's like $4,000. That's EPA, not ICC, but that's one way to increase the numbers. Now, from the ICC's perspective, again, we go back to the grid. We're always talking about first of all, how can we build the grid or support building out the grid in the way we want to support EVs? And also, we make sure that the utility can charge in a way that when people are charging their EVs, they're incentivized to charge properly. Let me kind of break those two things down. So first, building the grid out to ensure that EVs are ready. It's all of this, the wiring that goes up to the charging station is very expensive, right? Sometimes requires new substations, inverters, and that all costs. And so if we want to build out this charging infrastructure and we see it as a social good, we can allow the utilities to socialize the costs, not for all build out, but for particular places. In our beneficial electrification docket, we talked a bit about this, and we determined that one place to make sure there was equity from the equity part of CEJA is to support public transportation. So building out these charging stations for CTA buses is extremely expensive. And so we determined that there could be support through socialized costs so that the CTA can more cost effectively build out charging stations to use for their buses so that everyone can use public transportation. And these buses that run through the communities, sometimes environmental justice communities, benefit from the clean air. So that's one example. That's the grid side of it. Now, on the price signal side, how much a utility can charge a customer is something we review as well. One good way to incentivize an EV owner, for example, we want them to come home, and it would be great to have a smart charger, put it and have it set for like a time of use rate. And ideally that EV would charge in the middle of the night when very little people are using power. It should be cheap. That'll be cheap for the owner, for the user. It'll also not harm the grid. Because the worst thing that an EV owner could do is come and plug it in at 5 p.m. on like the hottest of all days when the ACs are cranked up. They just add to the problem. And so through things like a time of use rate, they will be disincentivized. They will have to pay extra money, pay more per kilowatt hour to charge at that time. So those two pieces together not only build the grid out to support EVs, but also when people are charging their EVs, they can actually help the grid, not harm the grid.
Yeah, when we eventually make the transition to electrified transportation, we're going to need a lot more kWh on the grid. We're going to double or triple the amount of electricity on the grid. And so it is completely non-trivial that we need more substations and wires and et cetera, so that we have access to these charging stations and ultimately the kWh that we need to charge those batteries. The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by Dinawatts. If you're a solar PV asset manager or performance engineer, you need better data and better business intelligence. With Dinawatts' digital twin benchmarking technology, you get more accurate, efficient, and faster performance measurement results. The 4th generation Dino recently completed a technical review by DNV. You can download the report at dinawatts.com. That's DENOWATTS.com. Now back to the show. It's been wonderful having you on the show, Carrie. I wonder if you have any parting comments and if you can say anything about what the future holds. Your term has now ended or coming to an end. I think this is your last week at the ICC. So what are your closing comments?
Yeah, thank you. I That's right. The June 16th is my last day. I transition off. It's been incredible. I've been reflecting a bit upon the last 4 years, and I'm really proud of what I've been able to accomplish in a relatively short amount of time. 4 years in some ways is very short. In other ways, it feels like a lifetime, having gone through COVID, but implementing CEJA, I think, is the thing that I'm most excited about. As you know, Tim, it was nearly 1,000 pages of legislation, and it put a lot of new authority and a lot of new workload on our tiny commission of about 200 people. And if you take away the rail side, transportation side, it's about 115 people working on this stuff. And we were asked to meet really strict statutory deadlines, really tight with limited staff. And we did it. We worked really hard to make sure we had a plan in place. So we executed the plan, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but we met all the deadlines, got through these incredible amount of workload. So as I reflect and I'm walking out the door, I really love what I was able to do and help and support in CEJA. I also believe that I'm leaving the commission better than I found it. I've been really working on accessibility for the public and for people in the industry, all perspectives in the industry, accessibility. And that's why I'm speaking to you today, trying to educate and explain that we're here and we want to hear people speaking at the commission. So that was another thing I worked really hard on. And I think I've moved the needle. There is always more work to be done, but it's something that I've been really proud of. So to answer the question, I'm not going to answer the question. I am not, there's obviously a lot of revolving door considerations. And so I am transitioning off the commission, and then we'll, make decisions on next steps. So please stay tuned for announcements. But I am taking a month off, that's for sure. And just hopefully just get some time to unwind. It's been quite, it's been a quite busy 4 years.
Well, thank you so much for your service to the great state of Illinois. And thank you for coming on the show. That was a wonderful discussion. Thank you, Carrie Zalewski, chairman of the ICC. I'm Tim Montague. Please check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a rating and a review on Apple or Spotify, and tell your friends about the show. I also love to hear from our listeners. Reach out to me at cleanpowerhour.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage. Take care. Hey, listeners. This is Tim. I want to give a shout out to all of you. I do this for you twice a week. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving us your time. I really appreciate you and what you're all about. You are part and parcel of the energy transition, whether you're an energy professional today or an aspiring energy professional. So thank you. I want to let you know that the Clean Power Hour has launched a listener survey, and it would mean so much to me if you would go to cleanpowerhour.com, click on the About Us link right there on the main navigation. That takes you to the About page, and you'll see a big graphic, Listener Survey. Just click on that graphic, and it takes just a couple of minutes. If you fill out the survey, I will send you a lovely baseball cap with our logo on it. The other thing I want our listeners to know is that this podcast is made possible by corporate sponsors. We have two wonderful sponsors today, Chin Power Systems, the leading three-phase string inverter manufacturer in North America, and Dynawatts, a performance monitoring platform for utility scale solar. So check out CPS America and Dynawatts. But we are very actively looking for additional support to make this show work. And you see here our media kit with all the sponsor benefits and statistics about the show. We're dropping 2 episodes a week. We have now over 320,000 downloads on YouTube, and we're getting about 45,000 downloads per month. So this is a great way to bring your brand to our listeners. And our listeners are decision makers in clean energy. This includes project executives, engineers, finance, project management, and many other professionals who are making decisions about and developing, designing, installing, and making possible clean energy projects. So check out cleanpowerhour.com, both our listener survey on the About Us and our media kit, and become a sponsor today. Thank you so much. Let's grow solar and storage. The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by CPS America, the maker of North America's #1 three-phase string inverter, with over 6 gigawatts shipped in the U.S. The CPS America product lineup includes three-phase string inverters ranging from 25 to 275 kW. Their flagship inverter, the CPS 250-275, is designed to work with solar plants ranging from 2 megawatts to 2 gigawatts. The 250-275 pairs well with CPS America's exceptional data communication, controls, and energy storage solutions. Go to chintpowersystems.com to find out more.